My name is Caitlin Rogers. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. The kind of place where the sidewalks are lined with wet leaves in winter and people keep to themselves unless they mean it. My best friend Brianna Chen and I currently own 21 coffee shops across 5 states. We started 5 years ago with one small rented space and nothing but our savings. No loans, no investors, and definitely no help from my family. Even now, with a stable income and a house worth nearly $600,000, I still choose to live quietly. Not because I'm humble, because I learned the hard way that in my family, success isn't celebrated. It's audited. And whenever they find something valuable, they don't ask how you built it. They ask what they're owed. That's why I promised myself years ago I would never brag. Not to strangers, not online, and especially not in front of them. That promise traces back to something that happened 7 years ago, a moment of pride that turned into a lifetime of punishment. I thought I'd buried that part of me, but last Christmas I slipped. I said one sentence that felt harmless, and it was all they needed. In early December last year, when the Christmas spirit had started settling into every street corner like a staged photo, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my fingers freeze before I even touched it. Aunt Lauren. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 years. She was my mother's younger sister, soft-spoken, warm-eyed, the kind of woman who used to show up with pastries and sun-warmed fruit from her backyard, like love was something you could carry in grocery bags. After my mom passed away nearly 10 years ago, Aunt Lauren stopped coming around. Not because she stopped caring, because my father made sure she felt unwelcome every time she tried. I still remember the rare visits after the funeral. Aunt Lauren would knock gently, hopeful like a child. My father would open the door already scowling, as if grief had turned into irritation, and she was the inconvenience. "We don't need pity," he'd say too loud, too sharp. Once, when my brother and I were laughing with her in the living room, my father stood up so suddenly his chair scraped the floor. "If that's the kind of visit this is," he roared, "don't bother. I can take care of my kids." After that, Aunt Lauren disappeared from our lives the way people do when they've been punished for trying to love you. So when she called, it didn't feel like Christmas. It felt like a door creaking open in a house I thought had burned down. After a few cautious pleasantries, she asked if I could come home with the family for this year's Christmas party. I stayed silent so long I could hear her breathing on the line. I was about to say no. I'd said no for 7 years. But before I could, she added softly, "Everyone misses you." That sentence sat between us like a fragile ornament. I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure if they missed me, or if they missed the old version of me, the one who used to sit quietly while they spoke over me, judged me, decided who I was allowed to be. That night I didn't sleep. Curiosity is a dangerous thing when you've been hurt before. It makes you imagine a better ending even when you know the script. Maybe part of me wanted to believe Aunt Lauren meant it. Maybe part of me wanted to test if my family had changed. Or maybe I just wanted to stop wondering. Either way, I decided to go back. Christmas morning, after nearly 2 hours of driving from Portland to Salem, I pulled up in front of Aunt Lauren's house right as the clock struck 1100 a.m. The yard was already full. Cars lined up, voices floating from the porch, laughter that sounded bright until you remembered it belonged to people who could turn cold in a second. As I searched for a parking spot, a familiar voice called out loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "7 years and you're still driving that thing?" the voice said. "Looks like nothing's changed." I turned. Peter, my cousin. He was leaning against a brand new SUV like it was an extension of his personality. Arms crossed, smug expression, the kind of grin that only shows up when someone thinks they've found your weak spot. I looked at him for a few seconds, then exhaled through my nose. And smiled. Not because it was funny, because I refused to give him what he wanted. I didn't come back to argue. I didn't come back to prove anything. After I parked, I grabbed the gift bag I'd prepared the night before. Inside were a few bottles of wine. Not expensive, but classy enough to say I respect your home, even if my family doesn't respect me. When I stepped into the living room, my stomach tightened. 2 people stood near the big Christmas tree by the wall. My father and my younger brother, Caleb Rogers and Brody Rogers. I hadn't seen them in 7 years, but their faces were the same. My father's jaw set like a locked door, Brody's eyes avoiding mine, like I was something inconvenient. Their eyes landed on me for maybe 3 seconds. Then they turned away, like I was furniture. Like I was a mistake Aunt Lauren forgot to hide before guests arrived. I didn't walk over to them. I nodded at nearby relatives, answered polite questions about work and health, and kept my smile at that perfect level, enough to be respectful, not enough to look eager. A moment later, Aunt Lauren came out of the kitchen. When she saw me, she ripped off her oven mitts and rushed toward me like she'd been holding her breath for years. She hugged me tightly. Her voice trembled. "Welcome home." And for one fragile second, I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time I could belong here, even just for a day. But the thing about hope is, in the wrong house, it becomes a setup. About 15 minutes after I arrived, the party officially began. I sat at the end of the table next to a few younger cousins, letting their chatter fill the gaps so I didn't have to force conversation with people who only remembered me as the family disappointment. The table was set with classic holiday dishes: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered rolls, cream soup, trays of homemade desserts. Everything still steamed. Aunt Lauren must have been cooking all morning. And there she was, moving around the room quietly, refilling drinks, checking plates, smoothing over tension with the same tired grace she'd probably been using her whole life around this family. About 30 minutes into the meal, laughter started rising from the far end of the table. And then Uncle Andrew turned toward me. His voice cut cleanly through the noise, practiced and confident, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "So, Caitlin," he said, "still working at that coffee shop?" I felt every head turn, every pair of eyes sliding toward me like spotlights. Uncle Andrew asked that question because 3 years earlier, he'd taken a short business trip to Portland. By coincidence, he walked into one of my shops on a day 2 employees had called in sick. The place had been packed, so I wore a uniform and stepped behind the counter. Not because I had to, because I never asked my staff to do something I wouldn't do myself. When Uncle Andrew saw me in that uniform, he froze for just a moment. Surprise flashed across his eyes, but he didn't say anything then. He waited. A few days later, the messages started. Sarcastic texts, laughing emojis, a photo of me in uniform like it was proof of my failure. And then one night, a message from my father. No build-up. Just one sentence. "You embarrassed me." I didn't reply, because by then, my father and I had already lost the kind of connection that could be repaired with words. Now, 3 years later, Uncle Andrew brought it up again, right in the middle of Christmas dinner, like he'd been saving it for a stage. I sat still, my hand resting on my spoon. Part of me wanted to let it pass. I'd built an entire life around letting things pass. But something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the sideways glance from my father across the table. Maybe it was the faint laugh from a relative nearby. Or maybe it was the simple fact that I was tired of being treated like I was still the same powerless girl I used to be. I lifted my head, looked Uncle Andrew straight in the eyes, and said calmly, "Yes, I still do." Then, like I was stating the weather, I added, "And I'm the co-founder of 21 coffee shops operating across 5 states. The table fell quiet again. And then Peter, of course it was Peter, burst out laughing. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh my God, listen to her," he said. "She sounds like one of those TikTok hustle bros. That was some wild fiction." A few people chuckled. One of my aunts nodded like she was solving a math problem. "Yeah, founder, but still serving tables? Something doesn't add up." Someone else chimed in, smug and careless. "Exactly. Anyone can say that. I could call myself the owner of a 5-star restaurant if all it took was talk." The laughter spread like spilled wine. Glances, nods, quiet snickers they didn't even bother hiding. And in that moment, I realized something strange. I wasn't ashamed. Not this time. Because shame comes from believing you deserve it. And I didn't. The only thing I noticed was my father. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. He just stared at the wine glass in front of him, like he'd heard something he didn't know how to respond to. About a minute after the laughter faded, the silence that followed didn't have a name. It felt like the whole room was waiting to see what my father would do. And right on cue, Caleb spoke. His voice was slow, low, restrained in that dangerous way that meant he wasn't trying to calm down. He was trying not to explode. "You're embarrassing me," he said. "Who do you think you are, saying you own 21 coffee shops?" He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on me. "Would you still drive that old car if you were that successful?" My younger brother Brody added from across the table, louder and sharper. "You're always like this, always trying to stand out, working in a coffee shop, caught in uniform, and still acting like you're special." I didn't answer. I just took a slow breath. Because I'd learned something over the years. If you try to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, you only give them more material to twist. My father slammed his wine glass against the table. The sound snapped everyone's attention back like a whip crack. He stood up, glaring at me like I was something rotten he'd just discovered in his house. "Get out," he shouted. "Don't ever show your face to this family again. You're a disgrace." And that was when I knew. with a clarity so clean it almost felt peaceful. I had no reason to stay. Not because I was hurt, because I finally saw it clearly. They weren't family, they were an audience. And I was only welcome when I played the role they'd written for me. I slid my chair back quietly, ready to leave, when a voice rang out from the head of the table. Clear. Firm. That's enough, Caleb. Everyone froze, because no one expected the voice to come from Aunt Lauren. She stood back straight, eyes calm but unafraid. The one who should leave this party is you, she said, not Caitlin. This is my house. You're a guest, and you don't have the right to kick anyone out of my home. The room held its breath. Aunt Lauren turned to Uncle Andrew next. Andrew, she said evenly, I hope this is the last time you mock someone in my house. The same goes for Peter. Teach your son some respect. Peter stared down at his plate. Uncle Andrew muttered, barely audible, I'm sorry, Lauren. Aunt Lauren looked back at me. Her eyes softened. Her voice dropped, steady and warm. Stay, Caitlin, she said. As long as I'm here, no one will push you around. For a second, I felt it. That sting behind the eyes that comes when someone protects you after you've gone too long without it. I nodded slightly and lied gently, the way you do when you don't want to make kindness carry your weight. Thank you, Auntie, I said, but I have something at the shop I need to take care of. She didn't argue. She just sighed, like she understood exactly what I meant. 10 minutes later, as I zipped my coat and stepped onto the porch, Aunt Lauren came out with a carefully packed bag of food. She pressed it into my hands. No speech, no apology, just a quiet act of love. And that was the moment my nose burned, not from sadness exactly, but from the ache of realizing that after all these years, someone in my family still cared enough not to let me walk away empty-handed. 2 hours later, I arrived at one of our familiar locations in Portland. The grinders hummed. The scent of coffee wrapped around me like safety. Soft jazz floated from the ceiling speakers. I nodded as I walked in. I nodded back. Luca stepped aside at the machine without a word. He knew I like to make my own drink when my mind won't sit still. 10 minutes later, I carried my cup to my usual spot by the window. Private enough to breathe, close enough to watch the whole cafe. I sat down, took a sip, and felt the bitterness pull me back into my body. My mind started to clear, and then it hit me. The memory. 7 years ago. The day my father decided what I was worth to him. The day I learned that in this family, love wasn't given. It was assigned. And I could feel it rising now, sharp and vivid, like it had only been waiting for the right moment to return. The truth is, I didn't remember 7 years ago because I wanted to. I remembered because Christmas had dragged the past out by the hair and shoved it back into my lap, like, here. You thought you outgrew this? You didn't. I sat in my usual corner by the window, the cafe lights soft against the rainy Portland afternoon. Outside, people hurried past with their shoulders hunched, collars up, faces hidden from the cold. Inside, everything was familiar. Espresso steam, quiet jazz, the low murmur of customers. Safe. And yet my chest felt tight, like my ribs were trying to hold something in. I stared into my coffee, watching the surface ripple every time my hand trembled slightly. 7 years ago, I was still living at home. Not because I wanted to. Because after Mom died, the house felt like the last place where her voice still existed. The walls still held her laughter in the corners. Her favorite mug still sat in the cabinet, untouched. And part of me, stupidly, believed that staying meant I was still loyal to her. But my father didn't grieve the way normal people do. Caleb grieved like grief was an insult, like sadness made him weak, like the world owed him for having to feel anything at all. That weekend afternoon, I came home from work and found him in the living room with a newspaper. He wasn't reading it. He was doing that thing he always did, holding it open like a prop, pretending to be calm while he waited to drop a decision that would affect everyone else. He called my name without looking up. Caitlin, come sit. My stomach tightened, the way it always did when he said my name like a command instead of a daughter. I pulled out a chair across from him. The air in the room was still, heavy, almost stale. The TV was off. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock that Mom used to complain about. Brody was there too, on the other side of the room with headphones on, staring at his phone, legs stretched out like he owned the entire house. Caleb folded the newspaper carefully, too carefully, and placed it on the table, like he was setting up a stage. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, in the same tone a man might use to discuss lawn care, I'm planning to leave this house to your brother. I didn't understand the sentence at first. My brain heard the words, but my body didn't accept them. I blinked once. Then again. And I asked, what? Caleb didn't repeat himself with softness. He repeated himself with certainty. He needs a stable place to start after graduation. I stared at him. The house wasn't just a house. It was the last thing Mom left behind. It was the place where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where she used to sing in the kitchen while she cooked, where she'd sit at the edge of my bed and smooth my hair when I couldn't sleep. And my father was handing it to my brother like a prize. I forced my voice to stay low, steady, steady. What about me? Caleb didn't even hesitate. You already have a job. You make good money. You can take care of yourself. He leaned back in his chair like he'd settled the matter. Your brother might not land something decent after school like you did. My jaw locked. I clasped my hands in my lap, nails pressing into my palms, because I knew if I raised my voice, he'd make me the problem. He'd twist it into disrespect. He'd claim I was ungrateful. So I stayed calm. And I said, do you remember who's been covering most of Brody's tuition? Caleb's eyes narrowed. I continued anyway. A girl who's only been working for a little over a year, sending money back every month, like clockwork, on the 15th. Silence. The kind that isn't empty. The kind that's full of people refusing to admit the truth. Brody's music had stopped. I knew it because his thumb wasn't moving on his phone anymore. I looked straight at him. You don't have anything to say? Brody didn't even remove his headphones. He didn't meet my eyes. He just shrugged, like my pain was a weather update. This is Dad's decision, he said. I'm not getting involved. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not rage, not heartbreak, recognition. Because that sentence told me everything about Brody. He wasn't neutral. He was convenient. He was the kind of person who let others do the dirty work as long as he benefited from the outcome. I nodded slowly. Okay. That was all I said. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for fairness like some desperate child. Because deep down, I knew something that terrified me. This decision wasn't sudden. It was just finally spoken out loud. That night, I packed. Not dramatically, not with slamming drawers or sobbing in the hallway. I packed the way you pack when you've already accepted the truth and you're simply executing the escape. A suitcase, a backpack from college, a few shirts, work clothes, my laptop, documents, and the one thing I couldn't replace, a small photo of Mom smiling in the kitchen, flour on her hands, eyes bright, like she still believed in the goodness of the people around her. No one stopped me. Not my father. Not my brother. Not a single "where are you going?" or "come talk to me." It happened in a strange, quiet way, like they'd been waiting for me to leave. Like the house was already theirs, and I was just the last item to remove. By midnight, I was gone. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, more than 30 minutes from my job. It wasn't spacious or fancy, but it was clean and quiet enough to start over. And here's the part that still makes people misunderstand me when they hear it. I wasn't broke. Back then, I just graduated and landed a job at a finance company. My income wasn't less than $70,000 a year after taxes. I could have rented a nicer place, bought new furniture, leased a car, but I chose modesty on purpose, not to punish myself, to reclaim myself. I wanted to know exactly where every dollar went. I wanted to prove to myself that I could stand alone without anyone's approval, without anyone's crumbs of affection, without anyone holding my life over my head like a leash. I cooked my own meals. I set a budget. I saved a fixed amount each month. Not for a house, not for a luxury upgrade, just for a cushion, for freedom. For the day, I finally decided I wanted to build something that belonged to me. 2 years later, on a Friday evening, Brianna texted me, "Meet me, I've got something." We met at a small coffee shop downtown. It wasn't one of those glossy chains with bright neon signs and overpriced pastries. It was quiet, warm, the kind of place where people actually lingered. Brianna slid a folder across the table, a business plan draft. Her eyes were bright in a way that made me uneasy, because I'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone who was about to jump off a cliff and wanted you to jump with her. "I want to open an independent cafe," she said. "A real one, quality, soul, not another cookie-cutter franchise." I stared at the folder. I should have said no. I should have been responsible, careful, safe. But safety was a prison I'd lived in long enough. Brianna leaned forward. "I need a partner," she said quietly, "and I trust you more than anyone." I hesitated, not because I didn't believe in her, because I did. But belief is scary when you've been taught your whole life that wanting more is arrogant. I looked into Brianna's eyes and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not judgment, commitment. So I opened the folder, and that was the moment my life split in two. The life where I survived, and the life where I built. We withdrew every dollar we'd saved. We rented a tiny space on a quiet corner of Alberta Street in Portland. We named it Elm and Cedar. The early days were brutal. We painted the walls ourselves, built shelves ourselves, rented used machines that broke at the worst times, worked open to close, then stayed late to do the books line by line, down to every receipt. Some days it rained nonstop and we sold 3 cups. Some days the espresso machine died during peak hour, and we had customers staring like we'd personally betrayed them. At night, my body would ache so deeply I'd lie in bed and feel the soreness pulsing through my bones. But my mind felt alive. And then the regulars started coming. A woman who came every Monday morning and always ordered the same drink, her voice still sleepy, but her smile always kind. A man who claimed the same corner seat every afternoon and tipped an exact change, as if he was trying to prove something to himself. A pair of college students who treated our cafe like their second home. Little by little, Elm and Cedar became a place. A year later, we opened our second location. Then another. Beaverton, Salem, Seattle. Each city was a new lesson. How to hire, how to manage, how to keep the soul of the brand intact, no matter how far we expanded. 5 years after that tiny rental space, we had 21 coffee shops across 5 states. And the strangest part, even after all that, I still wore the uniform sometimes. Because I never forgot what it felt like to be the one taking orders, wiping counters, covering shifts when someone got sick. I never forgot the girl who had to build herself from nothing but silence and stubbornness. So when Uncle Andrew saw me 3 years ago behind the counter in uniform, it made perfect sense to him in the shallow way people like him understand the world. Uniform equals worker. Worker equals inferior. Inferior equals safe target. He never considered the possibility that the person making the drink could also be the person who built the place. That's how minds like his work. They can't hold 2 truths at once if it disrupts their hierarchy. Back in the present, I took another sip of coffee and felt my throat tighten. 7 years ago, I learned my family didn't want me to win. They wanted me to need them. And last Christmas, I had walked into that house like an idiot, half hoping time had changed them. It hadn't. Time just made them better at hiding the knives until it was convenient. My eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the rain had slowed into a mist. Inside, the cafe hummed on, steady and warm. And then my phone buzzed. A notification. Instagram. I picked it up without thinking. Just habit, just reflex. I opened the app, and my breath caught, because under an old, harmless post, just a photo of a coffee cup captioned "Slow Morning," there were new comments. Unfamiliar names, mocking words. Still bragging about your coffee chain? Humble CEO still making drinks? Sure. My fingers went cold. A strange tightness crawled into my chest, sharp and familiar. Not pain, not fear. That sensation of realizing something is happening to you, and you're not the one holding the narrative. I scrolled again. More comments. More laughter in text form. Then a shadow fell across my table. I looked up. Lucas stood there, phone in hand, concern written across his face, like he'd been holding it in for minutes. "You should see this," he said softly. "I think you need to know." He held out his phone, and on the screen was a video I hadn't agreed to, a video I hadn't even known existed. The thumbnail alone made my stomach drop. Aunt Lauren's living room. My face turned slightly to the side, frozen mid-sentence, like the internet had captured me in the exact moment my family decided to laugh. I took the phone and hit play. The video started without context. No introduction, no explanation. Just a tight, shaky clip filmed from somewhere near the end of the Christmas table. Close enough to catch my voice, far enough to cut out everything that came before and after. I'm the co-founder of 21 coffee shops operating across 5 states. Cut. Laughter. Peter's voice loud and smug. "Oh my God, listen to her." Cut again. More laughter. A few mocking comments layered over each other. Then my father's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "Get out of here and don't ever show your face to this family again. You're a disgrace." The video ended there. No Aunt Lauren standing up. No context. No history. No 7 years of silence. Just a clean, cruel narrative wrapped up in 30 seconds. I looked at the title. Bold, efficient, designed to humiliate. Caitlin Rogers claims to own 21 coffee shops. Gets kicked out for lying. My ears rang. Not loudly. Just enough to make everything feel slightly unreal, like I was watching my own life through a pane of glass. Below the video, the view count was climbing fast. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. The comments refreshed as I scrolled, each one more confident than the last. Delusional people always tell on themselves. If you really owned 21 shops, you wouldn't be wearing a uniform. Another fake entrepreneur exposed. Strangers dissected my face, my tone, my posture. People who had never met me, never set foot in one of our cafes, never known what it cost to build something from nothing. And yet they spoke like experts. Because that's what the internet does best. It rewards certainty, not truth. I handed the phone back to Luca. My fingers felt numb, like I'd been holding something too cold for too long. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know if you'd already seen it." "It's okay," I replied. And the strange thing was, I meant it. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel exposed. I felt familiar. This wasn't new. This was the same pattern, just with a bigger audience. People hear the loudest version of a story and decide it's the whole thing. They always have. I locked my phone, then unlocked it again, opened my social media settings and started shutting things down. Instagram, Facebook, anything tied to my name. I wasn't interested in defending myself against people who didn't want the truth. And I wasn't about to let strangers pick apart my life like entertainment. Silence has always been my way of taking control back. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Brianna," I answered before it could go to voicemail. Her voice came through fast, clipped, barely containing itself. "Did you see what they posted?" "Yes," I said calmly. There was a pause on the other end. Then, disbelief. "You saw it," she said, "and you sound like you're ordering lunch." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Argue with strangers?" Her breath came sharp through the line. "God, Caitlin, you drive me insane sometimes." I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. "This will blow over," I said. "It always does." Her frustration spilled out. "You're letting them control the narrative." "No," I replied quietly. "I'm refusing to participate in it." She didn't answer right away. Then, without another word, she hung up. I didn't blame her. Brianna has always been the kind of person who believes silence equals surrender. She fights. She pushes. She demands space in the room. I learned a long time ago that sometimes walking away is the only way to keep your dignity intact. That night, I went home and slept like I hadn't in weeks. No nightmares. No racing thoughts. Just deep, quiet rest. The next morning, I was in my kitchen making breakfast when my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Brianna. Just one line. "I took care of it for you." Below it, a link. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with understanding. I tapped it. It led back to the same family drama page. A new video had been posted less than 20 minutes earlier. This one didn't have flashy edits. No dramatic captions. No background music. Just Brianna, sitting inside one of our cafes. The logo was clearly visible behind her. She looked straight into the camera. No smile, no anger. Just resolve. "My name is Brianna Chen," she said, "and I co-founded a chain of 21 coffee shops with Caitlin Rogers." She held up a document. "This is our business license." Another page. "These are photos of the stores we built over the last 5 years." Another. "And this is an interview we did with a national coffee industry magazine last year." She paused, eyes steady. She doesn't owe anyone an explanation, but I think it's time people heard the truth. The video ended. I stared at the screen long after it stopped playing. Not because I was emotional, but because I knew Brianna would never do something like this lightly. She had crossed a line she rarely crossed, making something private public, because she was furious on my behalf. I sent her a message. "Thank you." Then I scrolled. The views were climbing even faster than the first video. Comments flooded in. "Editing a family video just to humiliate someone is disgusting. Receipts don't lie. This seems legit. Even if she owns the shops, the family was cruel." But not everyone was convinced. Some people always need a villain. Why stay silent yesterday and only show proof now? Feels a little arrogant, honestly. Just because it's true doesn't mean the way she said it wasn't bragging. I wasn't surprised. Social media isn't a courtroom. It's a coliseum. Truth only matters if it's entertaining enough to survive. In the days that followed, I went back to my routine. I stopped by shops unannounced, stood near the bar for a few minutes, asked a question or two, then left quietly. I'd done it this way for 5 years. No one treated me differently. No one whispered. No one stared. Inside these walls, I was just Caitlin, the person who showed up, listened, and worked. I thought the storm had passed. I was wrong. Exactly 1 week later, it returned. This time it came from the two people I least wanted to hear from. It was a Tuesday morning just after 9. I was reviewing payroll when my phone rang. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. "Dad?" I didn't hesitate. I hit decline. Less than a minute later, a message came through. "Your father and Brody are waiting at the Portland store. If you don't show up, I'll keep coming back." I stared at the screen. I wasn't shocked. But for the first time, I wasn't interested in avoiding them either. Some conversations don't end on their own. You have to close the door yourself. I grabbed my coat and headed to the cafe. I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes later. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving behind the soft hum of grinders and the low murmur of a few customers working quietly on laptops. Everything looked normal, peaceful, too peaceful. My father and Brody were seated in the back left corner, the most low-key spot in the shop, like they'd chosen it deliberately to avoid attention. My father sat rigidly, hands folded on the table, jaw tight. Brody leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes darting around the room as if he were already uncomfortable being there. The moment they saw me, both of them stood up. Too fast. Too rehearsed. Like they'd practiced this. "Caitlin," my father said, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. "Thank you for coming." I didn't return the smile. I didn't sit down either. I stood there, calm and still, and said the only thing that mattered. "Say what you came to say." Brody swallowed. My father cleared his throat. "I'm sorry about what happened at Christmas," Caleb said. His voice was controlled, measured, polite in a way that felt foreign on him. "Things got out of hand." Brody nodded quickly, eager to keep pace. "Yeah," he added, "we shouldn't have talked to you like that." The apology landed flat. No weight, no accountability. Just words tossed onto the table like spare change. I waited. Silence stretched. Then Brody jumped in, clearly unable to sit with it any longer. "We're still family," he said, voice suddenly practical, like we were negotiating a contract. "And, well, we thought maybe we could talk about the business." There it was. My father watched my face carefully, like he was trying to read which direction this conversation would tilt. Brody continued, "Maybe you could give Dad and me, I don't know, 10% of the company?" He said it casually, as if 10% wasn't years of labor, risk, and sleepless nights. Then, seeing no reaction from me, he rushed on. "Or if that's too much, maybe one store each. Just one. You have 21. It wouldn't really hurt you." I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not heartbreak, just clarity. The apology hadn't been an apology at all. It had been an entry fee. This was the invoice. I looked at them, really looked. At my father, who had spent years convincing me I was expendable. At my brother, who had stayed silent when it mattered most, then showed up the moment success made noise. 5 minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. They were waiting. I finally lifted my eyes. "Go home," I said evenly, "and wait to hear from my lawyer." The effect was immediate. Brody's shoulders relaxed. My father leaned back slightly. Relief flickered across both their faces. They misunderstood. They thought paperwork was coming. They thought ownership. They thought I'd finally paid the toll required to belong. I didn't correct them. I turned and walked away. As soon as they left the cafe, I pulled out my phone and called Eric, the legal representative Brianna and I had worked with since our third location. I told him exactly what had happened. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. When I finished, there was a brief pause on the line. Then Eric spoke calm and decisive. "Leave it to me," he said. "It'll be done in 2 days." I didn't ask what it was. I already knew. 2 days later, early in the morning, my phone rang again. "Eric, the letters have been delivered," he said. "Originals handed directly to them. Full confirmation." "Thank you," I replied. That afternoon, while I was reviewing inventory reports, my phone rang once more. This time I answered. My father's voice exploded through the line. "You ungrateful little," he started. "Is this how you treat your father?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. "I don't have a father," I said clearly. "You've got the wrong person." Then I hung up and blocked both numbers. What my father and Brody had received wasn't a transfer form. It wasn't a share certificate. It was a legally binding no-contact order, accompanied by a formal cease and desist letter. The language was precise, cold, unavoidable. Any further interference with our business operations would trigger litigation, damages they couldn't afford, even if they sold the house Brody now held the title to. The days that followed were quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced before. No surprise visits, no threatening messages, no phone calls filled with obligation disguised as love. I went to work, visited the shops, sat in my usual corner with a cup of coffee just hot enough. And for the first time in years, I didn't worry about who might walk through the door uninvited. Some people would say I was too harsh, that I should have forgiven them. That family deserves infinite chances. But forgiveness isn't about reopening doors that were never safe. It's about knowing when to stop letting people hurt you just because they share your blood. I didn't shut anyone out. I simply stopped holding the door open. Not everyone who walks in deserves to stay. And it took me a long time to understand this. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means boundaries. Peace doesn't come from controlling everything. It comes from finally choosing what no longer gets access to you. The days after I blocked my father and Brody were strange. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just quiet. And for someone who grew up in a house where silence meant tension, where quiet was always the pause before another argument, that kind of peace felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Another call from an unknown number, a surprise appearance at one of the stores, a relative reaching out to mediate, but nothing came. The mornings returned to their simple rhythm. I woke up early, made coffee at home, and drove through Portland streets still slick with rain. I rotated through locations like I always had, never announcing myself, never drawing attention. I stood near the bar, asked how things were going, fixed small issues before they grew teeth. To my staff, I wasn't a headline. I wasn't that woman from the viral video. I was just Caitlin, the one who remembered their names, the one who jumped in when someone called out sick, the one who cared about details most people thought didn't matter. And that grounded me. One afternoon, about a week later, Brianna and I sat in the back office of our original Elm and Cedar location. The walls still held faint marks from where we'd once measured shelves with a pencil because we couldn't afford a level. She looked at me over her coffee. "You okay?" she asked. I considered the question carefully, because okay used to mean surviving. But now, I think, I said slowly, this is the first time I've been at peace without waiting for permission. She smiled, not wide, not proud. Just understanding. "Good," she said. "You deserve that." That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop, not to work, not to scroll, but to write. Not a post, not a response, just thoughts. I wrote about the Christmas table, about Aunt Lauren's hands pressing that bag of food into mine, about how humiliation feels different when you finally know your worth. And something clicked into place. I realized my father's anger wasn't about respect. It was about loss of control. For years, he decided who mattered and who didn't, who deserved and who didn't. And the moment I stopped needing his approval, the hierarchy collapsed. That terrified him. People like my father don't fear failure. They fear irrelevance. A few days later, I received a message from Aunt Lauren. Just one sentence. "I'm proud of you." No defense. No apology for the past. Just recognition. And somehow, that meant more than anything my father could have ever said. I never replied to the family drama page. I never reposted Brianna's video. I let the internet move on to the next outrage, the next stranger to dissect, because that's what it does. But I kept something from all of this. A lesson I wish I'd learned sooner. Don't rush to share your success, especially with people who don't ask out of care, but out of calculation. Silence isn't weakness. It's discernment. Peace doesn't come from finally proving yourself to people who doubted you. It comes when you stop letting those people sit at the table where you make your decisions. So before I end this story, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place at that Christmas table, surrounded by relatives who saw you as ordinary, expendable, easy to mock, what would you have done? Would you have spoken the truth out loud, knowing they might tear it apart? Or would you have stayed silent, protecting the peace you worked so hard to build? There's no single right answer. But I know this now. The moment you choose yourself without guilt, that's the moment your life truly begins.